of shiurim during Hanukkah, and I'm devoting them to a general look at the idea of miracles. But today I want to start with material that's specifically related to Hanukkah, with a little bit of background, and then the broader philosophical and religious background I'll start tomorrow. I want to start with the first comment that Rashi makes in the Chumash, which has excited a lot of discussion, and I'll explain to you how I think it could be read. Let me translate it first. He quotes someone named Rabbi Yitzchak, which may be his father or may not be. The Torah should not begin with anything other than the first mitzvah, which is sanctifying the new month, which is in the book of Exodus. The Torah should not begin with anything other than the first mitzvah. And what reason is there that it began with this long history, which is the whole book of Genesis? And because he did so to explain the strength of his actions to his people, to give them, that is to say, to give to the Jewish people, the inheritance of other nations. For if the other nations of the world say to the Jews, you are robbers, because you conquered the lands that belonged to the 7 nations that were there before you, they, the Jewish people, will say back to them, the whole of the earth belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to the Creator. He created it, and He gave it to whom it was good in His eyes. With His will, He gave it to them, and now He gave it to us. That's what the Rashi says. So, the first question is, why does this Rabbi Yitzchak think that the Torah should have begun with the first mitzvah? What's wrong with beginning with history? And the answer to that seems to be that the Torah is a book of instruction how to live. The word Torah means roughly teaching. And since it's a book of instruction how to live, it should begin with instructions how to live, which are commandments. Yes, the story of the creation is important, but don't start with it. Put it in as background for other things that happen later, but you shouldn't start with it. Now, really you can separate, and then what's the answer? The answer is because after we conquer the land of Israel, there'll be a complaint from other nations that we stole the land from the native inhabitants. We're colonialists. Never heard about that complaint, huh? Never happened. And we can say to them, this is the answer. You don't own it. They didn't own it either. The ones who were before us didn't own it. It wasn't theirs because they got there first. There's a creator, and He's running the world, and He gives the things that are His to whom He pleases. And just as it pleased Him to give it to them, so it pleased Him to give it to us. And that's why we're not guilty of stealing it. So, to give just a little bit of analysis, what is this conception of the Torah which makes starting with history inappropriate? That's the conception of the Torah as a book of instruction how to live. So you have a clash between these two ideas. Well, when you have a clash between two ideas, there are at least 2 different ways to handle it. Let's say you have a clash between A and B. You could say, listen, A is right. We understand A, and A has to be left as it is, and B has to be reinterpreted. B has to be reevaluated so to make it consistent with A, or you could do it the other way. Here, either the Torah as a book of instruction, even though it's a book of instruction, tolerates starting with history. And no, just because the book is a book of instruction how to live doesn't mean you have to start with instructions how to live. You can start with history. There's no clash. Or the other way is to say, the Torah is a book of instruction, and it should start with instruction, and you've made a mistake that thinking of history as different from instruction. The history itself is instruction. It does tell you what to do. And that's why it starts with the history. Those are two different ways to solve the contradiction between them. And I'm going to promote now the second way. I think that Rashi's answer here is that really this story is an instruction how to live, and he applies it to a very interesting case. When you will be challenged by the nations of the world that you are robbers, here is what you are to say to them. That's an instruction. That's a command. This is how you should deal with it. So now, the history works like this. The history teaches us two things. Number one, the whole book of Genesis, that God created the universe, and therefore it's his. And number two, he hasn't abandoned it. There's something called deism, which sees intelligence in the world and credits the force that gave it its existence with intelligence, and then said it went on vacation, meditating. And the rest carries out with the order and structure that was presented, which was projected into it by the Creator. But that's not right. That's not right either. Because the whole of the book of Genesis is God interacting with history and guiding it and creating circumstances and changing circumstances. So, first of all, we're taught these two facts. There's a Creator, and that the Creator is involved in managing the world. And then we're told, here's what you should do with that. What you should do with that is, you should use that to instruct other people when they come to object that what we do is without justification. The fact that we start with this means that this instruction is very important. After all, you could still say, okay, I understand why it isn't contradictory to the character of the book to start with the history, because the history contains within it instructions how to live. But how did you choose this one rather than the other one? What made this one so important, so prominent, that you would want to start with this? And the Maharal in Yeshivat Torah has a whole chapter on this. There is in Pirkei Avos, the so-called Ethics of the Fathers, or the Chapters of the Fathers, an instruction. Da masha toshiv la'apikoros. Know what to answer the heretic when he challenges you. And the Maharal takes this very, very seriously. He says this is an extremely important responsibility. People who fulfill it will be the top rung of the world to come. And he says, if you want to answer somebody else's complaints, one of the things you need to do is to study his writings, so you know what he says, so you know how to answer him. And no, if you're studying the writings of the heretics, you're not wasting your time, and you're not cheating on the mitzvah of learning Torah, absolutely not. And he wrote a whole sefer, Be'er HaGolah, where he answered the prominent heretics of his time. So, and he says that, he doesn't address the first Rashi, but I'm attaching that to the first Rashi. And there's a double lesson in particular here. Number one, don't just dismiss heretics. It would be easy to say, so they're ignorant, they're intellectually challenged, they're viciously motivated. Who cares about them? No, that's wrong. Rashi tells you when the other non-Jewish nations will challenge you, there is an attitude. A non-Jew is going to challenge me on the ways that I have. Let him do his own thing and leave me alone. No. We're being told here that the Torah starts, according to Rabbi Yitzchak, the Torah starts with this information so you'll know what to answer him. And, as you know from your own experience, if you give the critic this answer, very often he won't accept it. you have this story about a creator and he's running the world and so forth and so on. Don't talk to me. I believe in Marx. Okay, we're told to say it anyway. This is the answer that we're supposed to provide them. That means to say, communicating the truth about the world is important, even if the person you're talking to will not accept it from you. When he challenges you, this is not saying you should go out on the street corner with your sign, the end of the world is coming, repent before it's too late. No, it's not Hyde Park like they have in London. But if he comes to challenge you, don't be afraid to answer him, and to answer him in terms of what the Torah says is true, and state it as your understanding of the truth of the world. So then this becomes a mitzvah. The Torah is teaching us a mitzvah, and it is a book of teaching you how to live. And by putting it first, this mitzvah takes a very great place. And our people, when they were challenged, did not shrink from the challenges. You have in the Talmud a number of cases where either non-Jews or Jews who were not observant came to challenge, and they didn't just dismiss them, they gave them answers. Sometimes they gave them answers that were appropriate to them, and sometimes they gave them answers that were just a straight exposition of the Torah point of view, even if they're not going to accept it. So I think that's the lesson here. And the lesson for us, which we're going to use now, is that some of the critics will say they look at war and conquest and changing populations, running a particular piece of geography, as natural, purely natural. They don't imagine that there are any higher powers that are involved in these events. You can see this a little bit when they explain who won and who lost the war. How do they explain it? Superior strategy, or superior esprit de corps, spirit of the fighters, or he's fighting for his homeland, or they have a more disciplined society, or in psychological terms, economic terms, military strategy terms. Not often do they explain it in terms of there having been a higher power that engineered the victory. So that indicates that their picture of how war and peace work is a naturalistic picture. We start by saying you're wrong. It isn't a naturalistic picture. If they occupied the land before, it's because the Creator who manages the world wanted them to occupy it. And if we are occupying it now, it's because He wanted us to occupy it. It isn't a naturalistic procedure. So, that's the principle behind that I wanted to lay out as a starting point. We're together so far? Yeah.
Does that mean that we should try and know a little bit about their religion itself, like the Quran or the Bible?
So, first of all, this Rashi is talking about when they come and attack you. The Mishnah goes, I would say, a little bit further, know what to answer him. That's before he comes. It doesn't say when he comes to answer, then try to learn it up, and get back to him in 6 months. Yeah. If you should know beforehand. So that's going beyond what the Rashi says. And Maharal is definitely going beyond that. Now, should everybody do this? And should everybody sacrifice time for learning? No. Different people's lives are on different stages of development. And if a person is not quite sure whether you can boil the water on Shabbos or not, he better learn Hilchos Shabbos. And he better leave this to a later stage in his development. Right? So it's going to vary from person to person, and circumstance to circumstance. But the activity is an important activity. It's not an activity which has to be thrown away or criticized or simply discarded because it isn't learning Mishnayos. I wanted to make a smaller point than that. The Maharal makes an observation which I think to a certain extent is astonishing. Let's take a look at the various prayers that are associated with the holiday of Hanukkah. One of the, you take them, it's found in 187 in the Siddur. let's go through it and let's sort of keep track of what is said and also keep track of what is not said. The gray paragraph. And for the miracles, the salvation, mighty deeds, victories, battles, which you perform for our forefathers in these days at this time. That's in common to both Hanukkah and Purim. There's Matisyo, son of Yochanan, high priest, and his sons. When the wicked Greek kingdom rose up against your people Israel to make them forget your Torah and force them to stray from the laws that you willed, you, in your great mercy, stood for them in the time of their distress. You fought their battle, judged their claim, avenged their wrong. You delivered, that means the wrong that was done to them. You delivered the strong into the hands of the weak, the many into the hands of the few, the impure into the hands of the pure, the wicked into the hands of the righteous, and the malicious into the hands of the diligent students of your Torah. You made a great and holy name in your world for yourself and for your people Israel. You worked a great victory and salvation as this very day. Afterwards, your children came to the Holy of Holies of your house, cleansed your temple, purified the site of your holiness, and kindled lights in the courtyards of your sanctuary. And established these 8 days of Hanukkah, give thanks and praise to your great name. What's missing? Doesn't talk about the miracle of the oil at all. There's a lot of verbiage about the war, strong of the weak, experienced, inexperienced, and so forth and so on, great, many and few, battles, avenged their wrong, struck them down, but not a word about the oil. Isn't that a little peculiar? The introduction, the top 2 lines, which is by common with Hanukkah and Purim, talk about the miracles. After that, it's all battles. But still, miracles is the general word. Wouldn't you have thought, a footnote, a parenthesis, something? Okay. This is the text that we say in the prayers. This is the text that we say here in the benching. Okay. Maybe, we'll be able to figure out an answer to that. Let's take a look at the little paragraph that we say just before we light the candles, where we dedicate the candles. Surely, then there'll be a mention of the miracle. Take a look at page 783. When you light the candles, as they're burning, this is what you say, and you describe them. This is right in the middle of the page. These lights we kindle upon the miracles, the wonders, the salvations, and the battles which you performed for our forefathers in those days at this season through your holy priests. During all dates of Hanukkah, these lights are sacred. We're not permitted to make ordinary use of them, but to look at them in order to express thanks and praise your great name for your miracles, your wonders, and your salvation. That's all you had to go on. You wouldn't even know there was a miracle of the oil. And you'd be a little puzzled why we're kindling lights because of all those miracles and salvations. What's it got to do with burning candles? Isn't it really astonishing that the miracle of the candles isn't even mentioned? When you go places on Hanukkah, go for meals, you go to families, or ask this question. It's a good question. The Maharal has a very sharp explanation, and it forces us to focus in a particular way. He says that if we had been attached as a communications attaché to the Maccabean forces, or to the Greek forces, we would have observed no miraculous events in the conduct of the war. None. You'll tell me the few were victorious over the many, the weak over the strong. Has that never happened in human history in natural terms? Don't tell it to the Americans who are old enough to remember Vietnam. I remember the president saying, we'll bomb them back to the Stone Age. Yeah, But we ended up losing the whole country. Don't tell that to the British, who, with their red-coated, experienced armies, came to the new world, and surely put down that ragtag jumble of people, hiding behind trees, and they lost the American Revolutionary War. Sometimes the smaller group is victorious over the larger group, the weaker over the stronger, the less well supplied over the better supplied, especially when the smaller group is fighting for its homeland, and the other army are mercenaries just paid to fight. That does happen in history. And here, we were fighting for our homeland, and the others were mercenaries who were paid to fight. At any rate, says the Maharal, had you been attacked, the earth didn't open up and swallow their soldiers, boulders didn't fall from heaven, boiling oil didn't pour out of the crevices, nothing. It was battle after battle after battle, and there was a Jewish victory. Well, how should you look at that? How should you appreciate that? This, what I showed you from what's in the Siddur, describes the war as a great miracle. Over and over it says it's a great miracle. Well, how is it that when you're observing it, you don't see anything that's unheard of in history, and yet you're calling it a miracle? The answer is that the word miracle has two different meanings, and it's complicated. The same author in different passages can use the word in two different meanings, and that just means you've got to pay attention and have your thinking cap on to figure out what's meant. I'll illustrate to you the two meanings from two parts of the general literature. There's a blessing that a person makes if he goes past an area in which a miracle happened to him. I was riding my motorcycle uphill on a narrow mountain road, and all of a sudden, an oversized truck is coming down, and it's around the curve, and I didn't see it coming, and my motorcycle went off the edge, and it's a 500-foot drop down to the valley, but there was a tree, which caught me 10 feet down by my jacket. Motorcycle went falling all the way down and crashed and smashed to smithereens, but I was caught by my jacket. And 5 minutes later, somebody came by and noticed me and helped me get out. Every time I go past that place, I make a blessing that Hashem did a miracle for me in that spot. Let's say once I took a drink at a water fountain. I go past that spot again and say, oh yeah, that's the fountain that I took a drink at 6 years ago. Should I make a blessing there? How about every time I get into the bus? Or every time I come to the yeshiva? Make a blessing? Because isn't all of life a miracle? Isn't all of life God's presence of it and so on? I don't think so. That blessing which you make when you go past a place where there was a miracle means what we call an open, obvious, undeniable miracle. There is a use of the word miracle where something is, where, so to speak, God shows his hand. Where an honest, intelligent observer, and those qualifications aren't just throwaways, an honest, intelligent observer will say, yeah, that's not natural. That's just not not the sort of thing that you would expect to happen. And the word miracle in this sense means only that type of event. Now, when I say honest and intelligent, I'll give you an example of what I mean to exclude. There was a noted philosopher, British philosopher in the 20th century, Alfred Jules Ayer, one of whose parents was Jewish. And he said at a certain point in his life, if I had been at Sinai and I had witnessed the revelation, I would have made my way to the nearest psychiatrist, because obviously that would prove that I'm crazy and I would need help. I don't think that qualifies as open-minded. He's supposed to be an empiricist. The empiricist is supposed to follow his observations. Maybe you could change your thought about what's possible, what's impossible, on the basis of your experience. And to his credit, later in his life, he changed some of his mind about various things, so I'm not criticizing him as a person. But that statement was a very loose statement. He's saying, no matter what happens, if God's in the picture, I don't give up. I don't accept it, and I'm never going to reconsider. That's not called open-minded. So sometimes the word miracle means an event which an open-minded person would have to, the Jews are there at the banks of the Red Sea, and the Egyptian army is bearing down on them, and there are mountains on this side, mountains on that side, the sea is over there, and the Egyptians are bearing down from this side. And the Jews say to Moses, help! And Moses says, don't worry. And they say, don't worry. I'm from Brooklyn. I worry. What do you mean, don't worry? We're dead. And Moses says, don't worry, everything's going to be okay. Really, Moses, it's going to be okay. What should we do? Go into the water. Moses, I can't run in the water. They're coming with chariots. What do you mean just go into the water? Trust me. Everything will be okay. And then the sea splits. I don't think you could put that down to an accident. Especially since Moses knew it, especially since the Egyptians charged in after them and drowned. So if it was a local tide, that doesn't fit. The Egyptians, who were the local population, would know, wait 6 hours and then we'll get them, because we have chariots. So that's certainly something which an open-minded, honest person would have to admit is something which God did, where God shows his hand in the action that it's his performance. That's the one that you make a blessing for. That's one type of miracle. One usage of the word miracle. But another usage of the word miracle is just something that God does directly. That's something which you could say, isn't everything miraculous? That is to say, doesn't God do everything directly? And there you could have a debate. Maybe yes, maybe no. Maybe he gives it over to angels to do it. That's not him doing it. Maybe he creates laws of nature, and the laws of nature operate on autopilot, and he intervenes from time to time. You could have a variety of pictures. But if you allow that something that he does directly is miraculous, then it's possible to say we're surrounded by miracles all the time, because he's running the world. He's running all of it. Well, if you say that, and if you take what I explained in the first Rashi, that what's going on in the world is a result of God's management of the world, if you take that into account, then the war is a miracle. But it isn't obvious. It isn't obvious. Those people who would say God created nature and went on vacation and intervenes from time to time, you couldn't contradict them by saying, watch the war, because they could explain what happened in the war in naturalistic terms. If you told them, watch the crossing of the sea, then you could contradict them. If you tell them this, you can't. So it takes something more to understand and in experience a war as unnatural, as something which is a divine production. And this, says the Maharal, is the message in the prayers in the Siddur, that the challenge of Hanukkah, a central challenge of Hanukkah is to understand and relate to the war as a miracle. Even though, on the surface, you don't see that it's a miracle. And I think this message is very apropos for us, because we are living in a region of the world in which there's war, and not just war, but a war affecting us, our nation, our brothers and sisters, the people who are sacrificing for it, the people who are dying for it, how to look at the events that are taking place. So the secret here, which is what I'm going to spend the rest of the hour on, I'll take a question in a second, is to see how we're supposed to appreciate that the war is a direct divine production and not just laws of nature. Yeah, your question.
I thought that the war, we had like very few soldiers in it. Weren't there like only a very small amount?
Well, it started with the Maccabean family, but then they were joined by...
Yeah, but I mean, like it started, if you can start a war with only 8 soldiers, whatever it was, like, I would have thought that that's...
It's not as if there weren't any other soldiers. We fought battles throughout our history. Not as if we didn't have soldiers. We were, just people of the book. Where all we know is not know how to read. In fact, the Gemara tells us that there was a group, a town of Jews, where they mastered firing bows and arrows on horseback, and they were used for various military operations. I mean, it's not as if we didn't have. So the question is whether we should fight a war or not. The question is whether there was public sentiment for an uprising. It's not as if we weren't able to fight. There were very few people who started the uprising. It's not as if we had to train an army or train soldiers.
But there was more than just that Maccabee family?
Of course.
No, I mean that started the rise up.
No. Again, see if I can explain this to you. For example, you had in the Warsaw Ghetto, right? There were a few people who said it was important to resist. The vast majority didn't agree with them, and then there was a war, and a lot joined. Because they were capable of fighting, they just thought it wasn't wise to fight. And then with the inspiration of those who said you should fight, I'm not praising or condemning this now, I'm just talking about historical fact. So they were the ones who said, no, we can't take it anymore, we'll have to resist it, and we have to defend our religion by actively opposing the Assyrian Greeks and the other Jews who were on their side. But then they were joined by other people who identified with them. It wasn't 8 against 6,000. It was a popular uprising. Yeah.
By Mitzrayim, why wasn't it the shita for the Jewish people to go into the water after they just witnessed all these other miracles? Wouldn't it be obvious that more miracles would come?
Yeah, but the miracles could be why would, well, wait, there are 2 different questions here. Why were they worried, and why didn't they go into the water? Who's going to put a limit on what miracles God could do? Maybe boulders will fall on the Egyptian soldiers, as they did in the conquest of the city of Ai, where that was the miracle that was done. Or maybe the ground will open up under their feet, as the miracle that got rid of Korach was done. Why should they go into the water? Why should they expect that that's the way to see where the miracle is coming from? Until Moshe Rabbeinu says to do it. But I'll tell you something. There's a deeper thing going on here. You have a number of cases throughout the 40 years in the wilderness where there are rebellions. Now, don't exaggerate. It wasn't 82% of all the people, hundreds of thousands of people who rebelled. No, but there were rebellions. And even some who said, let's go back to Egypt. And the question there is a similar question. You saw so many miracles, why aren't you confident? And what do you go back to Egypt for? I mean, that's where you were slaves. Both questions are not correct. Both questions are not correct. First of all, before the Exodus, 80% of the Jewish population died in the 3 days of darkness. So there's an upside and a downside. Yeah, there are miracles. Some of the miracles kill us. So am I going to be confident that there will be continued divine providence? Yes, I'm confident in divine providence, but that doesn't mean it's all ice cream cones and candy. It could mean some of us will die because of that. Indeed, twice, because Baruch Hu says to Moshe, I'll wipe them out, because all of them, leave only you alive and start the Jewish people again. It isn't as if that was impossible to happen. So the idea that they can count on being cared for and protected and coddled the whole time, doesn't agree with their experience. That's number one. And number two, to go back to Egypt, they wouldn't be going back to slavery. They'd be going back to rule Egypt. Egypt was destroyed. The military forces are destroyed, and they're deathly afraid. They pushed us out because they said, if you stay here any longer, we're all dead. They were deathly afraid of us. They would be going back to be masters of Egypt, not to be slaves there. So their objections were not completely illogical or completely insane. So anyway, back to you. So now what the Maral teaches is that if you look carefully at the miracle of the oil, you can see that the war was direct divine providence, even though you didn't see miracles in the war itself. The miracle of the oil casts light, should I say that? On the nature of the war. I used to call this sheer the nature of nature. So let's take a little bit of a look at the way in which this is done and see if we can't find some connections. First of all, there's a very famous question which the author of the Shulchan Aruch, Yosef Karo, raised, and it's become famous. Every well-educated Jewish kid over the age of 6 knows the question, and there are 3 answers that he gave. And by the way, I was just reading now in one of the Chuvas of Usher Weiss, with whom you'll have contact. He was absolutely wonderful. He says that the Teshuvos HaRosh raised both the question and had the answers long before the Yosef Karo. Let's see. They found 1 night's worth of oil, and it burned for 8 nights. So, without a miracle, it would have burned for 1 night. With a miracle, it burned for 8 nights. How many miraculous nights do you have? 7. Why 8?
Because if only the last 7 were miracles, then let's say it was the first 7 and the last night was just regular. Each night has to take 1/8 of the oil it's supposed to. Otherwise, it doesn't work out.
Oh, you're presuming a particular mechanism by which the miracle takes place. You're right. If you presume that mechanism, which is one of the 24 or so mechanisms that are proposed, then indeed that would be true. Because if the oil burns more slowly, then every night it burned more slowly. So every night there's miracle. I agree to that. But there's another way that the miracle is described. These are all possibilities. We don't have any tradition how it worked. That when you poured the pitcher, it stayed full. But that would only happen 7 times. Because the last night, it could be empty, because the next night you're going to have new oil. So it only happens 7 times. So the question is, if you just take the global picture, I've got 1 night's oil naturally, and then I've got 7 more, which are miraculous, then it should be 7 rather than 8. That was the Beis Yosef's question. So there are various answers to that question. But the Pri Megadim says that we can use what we said before and the Beis Yosef's question to answer it this way. Maybe the first night you're not lighting it to symbolize or express the miracle of the oil. Maybe the first night you're lighting it to express the miracle of the war. And the last 7 nights you're expressing it the 7 nights of the miracle of the oil. And then, because you found enough oil for 1 night, and you light the first night, you're using that to express the miraculous nature of the seemingly natural war with the usage of the seemingly natural oil. It becomes parallel. They become parallel to one another. Now let's see. We have in the mitzvah of Hanukkah, I don't know if you've learned all the laws of Hanukkah, the real basic mitzvah is one light per house per night, which means if you have 44 people living in the house, the sum total of candles, they say, we use oil, for the whole of Hanukkah is 8 candles. That's all, no more. That's the mitzvah. You can make a blessing and everybody satisfies his obligation by one person lighting that one candle. Then there are 2 ways in which you can expand the mitzvah. Either each person in the house has his own candle, or you go up 1 the first night, 2 the second night, 3 the third night, etc. Each of those creates an enhancement of the mitzvah. And then you can have a double enhancement by doing both, which is what we do, because general economic resources are such that for us this is trivial in terms of actual expenditure. And, as the commentators point out, this is the only mitzvah in the whole of the Jewish corpus that has 2 enhancements. What's called in Hebrew mahadran. Mahadran means there's a way of doing it, basically, and satisfying the obligation. Then there's an enhanced way to do it. Many mitzvahs have that. But this has enhanced and doubly enhanced. Wow. Why should this mitzvah, of all the mitzvahs in the Torah, have this structure of double enhancement? And here's one of the reasons. Tell me, what would have happened if they had not found that one little container of oil? What would have happened then? All the oil that they had was now defiled. Tell me, what would happen?
They would either use bad oil or not light it for 8 days.
Okay, you got either or. That's correct. That's correct. Which one is right? That's the natural assumption. It's tamei, defiled. But it's not true. In terms of the service in the temple of the national service, if the only alternative you have to do the service is to use things that are tamei, you use them. And they would have burned tamei oil. So, what did the miracle actually accomplish? The miracle accomplished that they could burn the oil and light the menorah in the best possible way. The miracle didn't make it possible to light the menorah. They could have lit it without the miracle. But it made it possible to do it in the best possible way. So, Chazal created a structure of law that it has the basic way, the better way, which many mitzvos have, and then the doubly better way, which only this one has, to express the idea that this was something which was only for the sake of doing something in the best possible way. Okay, now, let's see. What oil was this? And how do they know that it was Tor? Well, as you probably learned, it had the seal of the high priest on the container. Why is that? Was he in the oil business, producing oil for make a little money on the side? No. The Kohen Gottleib was rich because the other Kohanim had to contribute to a fund because he should be rich and independent and not have to need anything from anybody else. So one explanation is this. There's a daily offering that the Kohen Gadol has to give, a mincha, a grain offering, half in the morning, half in the evening, and for that there had to be oil, because menachos have oil, and this Kohen made sure that the oil that was used for his offering would be of the very best purity and quality. And that's why it has his name on it. So here again, he's the person who's doing the best possible way. There's a supply of oil. He could have used the general supply of oil for menachos, but he didn't do that. He went out of his way to do it in the best possible way. You see a theme running through here. Now let's think about the war. Were the people obligated to fight against the Greeks? It's not obvious. I think you could learn it in different ways. And by the way, the period of Greek oppression was 52 years. It was a long time. And there were various stages, and they opposed different things at different stages. it's not obvious. The abominations that they did in the temple are not things for which you are required to risk your life to stop. There are only 3 types of mitzvos that you are required to risk your life to stop. And someone defiling the temple isn't one of them. So if that triggered the rebellion, then rebellion wasn't required by law. It's permissible, but it's not required by law. So again, here are people who are doing something which is not the bare minimum. It's not something where it's absolutely an absolute obligation. It's something where they're stepping beyond that. There's a theme that you see operating in common throughout all of the details. And here's where a link is being made to the war with the actual miracle of the oil. And then the war, when they reconquered Jerusalem and cleaned out the temple and set up the menorah, that wasn't the end of the war. There were still battles going on. So here they are, they're fighting this war to rid the country of the Greeks and to free Jews from their oppression. And that, as we saw in the Alanissim, it was religious oppression. The Greeks wanted to make the Torah forgotten and wanted the Jews to not do mitzvos. They're fighting this war, and they come to Jerusalem, and they come to the temple, which is the focus of their service of Hashem, and the place where the Greeks carried out abominations, and immediately, there's a miracle. And it was made possible by the battles that they fought. So they naturally took this as a confirmation. Yes, this is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted us to do. He wanted us to do this because he's crowning our victories, our military victories, and the intention of the military victory. It wasn't as if, when they conquered Jerusalem, new swords sprouted from the ground so they could fight the next battle in the north. No, it was in the temple, in the service in the temple. So here again, if the person looked carefully at the oil and the miracle of the oil, he sees a confirmation of what he's doing in the battles. And actually, this idea is built into the Hebrew word for miracle. The Hebrew word for miracle is nes. That word, with its root, has at least 3 different applications. One is to miracle. One is to test. Nisayon, lenasot, means to test something. And one is to a flagpole. Now, once upon a time in the SATs, there was something called the Miller analogies. They would give you A is to B as C is to, ? Figure out what the analogy is. I don't know if they do that anymore. Probably not. But if you think about it, how can you connect a test and a flagpole and a miracle? Well, what would be the connection? Let's start with a test. What's the purpose of a test? The purpose of a test is to reveal something that's hidden. You see my clay pots? My clay pots are special. They're very strong. That's why I charge high prices. And the customer says, I don't believe you. Why should I think that your clay pots are stronger than anybody else's? Watch, I'll show you. I pick it up and I hit it with a hammer. Bang! And it rings, C sharp major. And wow, look at that. That bang and the clay pot withstood it. I'll pay you whatever you want. The test reveals something which isn't visible. That's why you have exams in school, because the professor can't read your mind from looking at your forehead. He can't tell what you know and what you don't know. The purpose of the test is to reveal what you know and what you don't know, so he can grade your understanding. That's what tests do. Okay. What does a flagpole do? Flagpole holds up a flag.
Flag could be on the ground or just hidden in it.
Well, it's more than that. You're right. If it's down low, people can't see it. It's to make it prominent so it can be seen. That's part of it. But what's the purpose of flying a flag? Now, sometimes it's to show your patriotism, but very often it's to identify the position that it's flying. For example, this was absolutely necessary in war, because if you have a land battle in war, there's a lot of dust kicked up by the activity, and the atmosphere is murky, and they're chasing me. I want to run back to my side. My side. You know, where is my side? I don't run to the enemy soldiers. I run to the friendly soldiers. Oh, there's my flag. That's where my side is. Or you come into a strange town, there's a flag, maybe that's the post office. Or maybe it's the courthouse. It's probably some governmental institution. Not if you're in Detroit. They're very patriotic in Detroit. They used to be anyway. Maybe with the change of population, not so much anymore. They had gigantic flags in Detroit. Flags are used to identify what they're attached to. Each tribe had a flag. So again, you look at the flag, but your purpose in looking at the flag is not for the flag. Your purpose of looking at the flag is for the thing that's attached to the flag, the place where it's standing. Same thing when you hit the clay pot with a hammer. You're not thinking, oh, this will be great for the kids. They'll use it to play soccer in the backyard. They'll bang it with. No, that's not the point. But you got to cook your stew in it. Just you want to see that it's that. So hitting it with a hammer isn't for the sake of hitting hammers. It's for the sake of using the pot and confident of its strength. So the test is something that catches your attention and points your attention then to something else. And the same thing with the flag. It catches your attention and then points your attention to something else. Now, could that be true for miracles also? Well, if it's going to catch your attention, then it better be the first type of miracle, the splitting of the sea, where any honest, intelligent observer is going to agree that it's divine activity. Yes, okay, it's going to catch your attention. But then there's a message in it. Don't just look at the flag. Pay attention to what it expresses. And what we are going to see, Mitzvah Hashem, starting tomorrow, that very often, if you look carefully at a supernatural event and meditate on its significance, it will teach you something about what you, until then, thought of as a natural event, that maybe you have to reconsider how you're going to look at it, how you're going to deal with it. That's built into the meaning of the word nes, and that is the general message that the Maharal wants us to see here. That's why the Siddur is solely interested in expressing the battles, because it wants you to learn the lesson that the battles themselves are not without divine guidance. The word natural is a little tricky. Like the Chazon Ish says, you could define nature as the repetitive way in which God runs the world, as opposed to the certain circumstances in which the way in which he runs it isn't repetitive. But if you read God into running it in all circumstances, then the word nature is just a certain type of divine activity, as opposed to another type of divine activity. That would be to understand what Rashi is saying in the beginning of the Chumash, and what the Maharal wants us to understand over here, that the war is an expression of God's will. Okay, that's an introduction. And tonight, you're lighting, a few minutes, you're lighting the first candle. Think about the war also. And think also about the wars that the Jewish people are fighting now as well. Think about that as well, and try to see it as an expression of divine providence.